Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is October the 8th, 2024. It has been 3,907 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 230 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, 2 years and 227 days since Russia expanded its war of aggression, and 64 days since Ukraine counter-invaded Russia. Today's podcast covers the events that happened on Monday and Tuesday morning. Our Russia-Ukraine war map is a great companion to the podcast, and there is a link in the podcast description. There are map updates today. The Russia-Ukraine War Report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, Iron House team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian male bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission, the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment. It's unchanged from yesterday, so if you want to skip ahead, I don't mind. I won't even know. 1. Autocrat Vladimir Putin's order to recapture the Kursk region of Russia and capture Chasiv Yar, Toretsk, New York, Mirnograd, Pokrovsk, Kurakhove and Selidove by October the 15th is almost impossible, and in our assessment a new deadline of December the 31st will be set. 2. We remain unsure if the current operational tempo is a new normal, or if Moscow is attempting to advance as far as possible before fall weather arrives. We maintain that the current intensity of fighting is unsustainable, and at some point Russian combat operations have to decline. 3. Continued nuclear threats from Moscow highlight how the world remains caught in the mutually assured destruction instability paradox. 4. The lack of a meaningful response by Ukraine's allies and international organizations to open and unrestricted attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure by Russia has convinced Moscow this is an effective strategy with no political consequences. 5. Russia will maintain its attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, continuing Russian crimes against humanity that started in October 2022, as outlined in 4 arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court. The continued attacks are increasing the probability of a nuclear accident at one or more of Ukraine's nuclear power plants due to a loss of external power connections. 6. The policy of escalation management implemented by the NATO alliance and the United States is a complete failure that has only encouraged Russia to escalate hybrid and kinetic warfare actions against the NATO alliance and Ukraine's allies and their economic interests. 7. The Russian economy is much weaker than reported. 8. We maintain there could be a shift in Washington's policy toward Ukraine's request for deep strikes within Russia after the November the 5th national elections. We do not expect a meaningful change in NATO alliance policy after the Ramstein format meeting in October the 12th. On Monday, Russia carried out 172 discrete assaults, and through October the 7th, the 7-day moving average for daily attacks dropped to 153. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, that's the GSAFU, did not release data on Russian airstrikes and fire missions. There were no changes in territorial control in the Kursk Oblast of Russia. As a matter of fact, there weren't any major reports from the Kursk Oblast from any of our sources, so today's action report will focus on Ukraine. Ready? Here we go. Starting in the Kharkiv Oblast, Russian forces carried out over 20 attacks along the entire line of conflict from the Sinkivka area to occupied Novoselivsk in the direction of Lozova. Russian forces made a small advance into the next tree line north of Peshchane, while Ukrainian forces stabilized their defensive lines east of the Oskil River. Moving to the Luhansk Oblast, Russian forces made marginal gains from occupied Makiyivka, that's northwest of Crimea, advancing to the first tree line south of the settlement. Attempts to advance further west in the direction of Kharkivka were unsuccessful. To the west of Crimea, Russian forces were contained in Nevske and failed to advance toward Novosadova. Fighting continued on the approaches to Torske and in the Serebryansky forest. In the northeastern part of the Donetsk Oblast, near Kostiantynivka, Russian forces continue to make incursions across the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal at Kalinivka and Chasiv Yar, but are repeatedly pushed back. Positional fighting was reported in the forested areas near the canal between Ivanivske and Stupochki, with no change in the situation. Our friends at Sandbox News released more information about the Russian S-70 Okhotnik B heavy combatant crewed aerial vehicle shot down near Kostiantynivka. The drone's electronics were not connected to a Russian Su-57 through the S-111N communications complex. Instead, the escort Su-57 was acting as a repeater with the drone flown remotely by a ground operator. It is believed that the drone lost its connection while operating in Russian airspace and then flew on a course over occupied Ukraine. A decision to shoot it down was made after the Su-57 could not re-establish the relay connection from the ground operator as the drone approached Ukrainian-controlled territory. This is also the first time a Su-57 was documented flying to the edge of Ukrainian-controlled airspace. The CUAV crashed more intact than Moscow hoped, and far from the forwardmost line of friendly Russian troops. The review of the debris showed that the S-70 electronics are not revolutionary or advanced and are not supported by artificial intelligence. Its flight control capabilities are closer to the 23-year-old United States MQ-9 Reaper, which is also remotely operated. Fighting remains heavy in Southwestern Donetsk Oblast. In the Pokrovskoye, Russian forces are conducting 50 to 60% fewer daily assaults compared to 30 days ago, which is limiting their progress. Multiple Ukrainian unit commanders are reporting a combination of factors resulting in the temporarily improved situation. Beyond the lower operational tempo, Ukrainian defensive lines are being described as stabilized in some areas. There has been a reduction in Russian artillery capabilities, and the quality of Russian troops is declining. The biggest challenge remains the lack of air defense and the increasing use of glide bombs by the VKS. The heaviest fighting was in the area of the mine complex in Novogrodivka, with Russian forces trying to advance in the direction of Lysivka and Sukhy Yar. Russian attempts to advance toward Mirnograd using the railroad grade have been unsuccessful for almost 2 months. They are likely attempting to flank Ukrainian defenses to reach the E50 highway and advance directly on Pokrovsk from the south. In the Kurakhove, Ukrainian forces are maintaining their defense lines at Marinivka and Mikhailivka despite intense pressure from Russian troops trying to advance into Selidove. Ukrainian forces continue to defend Tsukurine, and the VKS released a video showing multiple locations in Hirnik being bombed, confirming that earlier Russian claims of advancing into the settlement were false. Russian troops are trying to advance from the mine complex and waste heap near Hirnik in the direction of Novoselidivka without success. There has been no evidence to support claims from Ukrainian sources of a Ukrainian withdrawal from the Nevelsk area Zhelanne I or Zhelanne II. In the Vremivka, a Russian armored column advanced from occupied Prechystivka, reaching Zolota Niva. The village is likely Russian-occupied, given the size of the force and the ease of the advance. The grey area was expanding, pending additional intelligence. The International Atomic Energy Agency released an update on the status of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. You'll need to hide your favorite coffee mug again. I'll wait. Director General Rafael Grossi condemned the assassination of Russian collaborator Andrei Korotkyi in a car bombing on the morning of October the 4th. Korotkyi's role at the NPP was unclear, with Ukrainian sources reporting he was the head of physical security, while Rosatom claimed he was the, quote, head of the permits bureau. Former ZNPP employee Alexander Selivestrov, who escaped Russian occupation, said that Korotkyi filed multiple denunciations against the Ukrainian staff, quote, handing over pro-Ukrainian citizens for torture by the Russians. The main Defense Intelligence Directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, or UGUR, accused Korotkyi of being directly involved in, quote, war crimes against civilians in the temporarily occupied Enerhodar, making him a legitimate military target. While declaring him a legitimate target and releasing the video of the car bombing, the UGUR has not claimed responsibility for the attack. In 2022 and 2023, the IAEA documented the arrest, deportation and disappearance of key staff at the NPP at the hands of Russian occupiers, and never released a strong statement nor followed up on the status of staff members who remain missing, some for over 2 years. Director General Grossi said that maintaining nuclear safety and security remains of paramount importance to prevent a nuclear accident during the conflict. Referencing the 7 pillars of nuclear safety, he added that Pillar 3 states, quote, the operating staff must be able to fulfill their safety and security duties and have the capacity to make decisions free of undue pressure. Any targeting of employees of nuclear power plants would constitute a blatant violation of this pillar fundamental for overall nuclear safety and security. Grossi called for, quote, maximum restraint during the conflict. And yes, he once again described Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine as a conflict, not a war, adding that any action targeting staff at the ZNPP, quote, has a direct impact on nuclear safety and security and must cease. In contrast, when a Russian attack on the 330 kV electrical substation in Marhanets in the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast knocked out the external power connection to ZNPP for 36 hours, Grossi declared on October the 3rd, quote, the off-site power station remains a deep source of concern. This week's loss of the 330 kV power line shows that the situation is not improving in this regard. The soft language is particularly jarring, considering Russia released a video showing their drone attacking the electrical substation, leaving no question on the responsible combatant. It's gotten very active in the Black Sea, occupied Crimea, the Mykolaiv Oblast and the Odesa Oblast again. The fuel depot and transshipment terminal in Odesa was still on fire almost 2 days after Ukraine's attack. New videos showed the fires had spread, and occupation officials reported over 1,000 residents near the facility were evacuated. The Crimean Tatar insurgent group Atesh had significant involvement in the planning phase of the attack, documenting the exact location of the air defense nodes within the facility. Satellite images confirm that a Pantsir S-1 air defense system located in the center of the tank farm was destroyed in the attack. Russian missiles attacked 2 more civilian cargo ships in Odesa ports, increasing the number to 4 vessels struck in less than 30 days. The Greek-owned St. Kitts and Nevis-flagged general cargo ship Paressa was hit by a missile while loading a cargo of 6,000 metric tons of corn at Pivdenny. The 15-member crew from Egypt and Syria were uninjured. Through a statement, the owners said the ship arrived at the Odessa port empty and was only involved in the shipment of grain. A second Russian Iskander-M short-range ballistic missile struck a Palau-flagged cargo ship also at Pivdenny. 1 Ukrainian dock worker was killed, and 5 crew members of the ship were wounded, with 1 in hospital. Overnight, Chornomorsk was attacked by Shahed-136 one-way drones and Russian decoys. Oleg Kiper, the head of the Odessa Oblast military administration, reported that 3 floors of an apartment building were set on fire, and an administration building received moderate damage.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/malcontentnews.
Here is today's Theaterwide update. The GUR claimed responsibility for the sabotage of the Russian minesweeper Alexander Obukhov, stationed at the Kaliningrad port of Baltiysk in the Baltic Sea. The ship's propulsion system was damaged. Highlighting how fast drone technology is evolving, a Ukrainian first-person view one-way drone targeted a Russian combatant crewed ground vehicle with an anti-drone cage. Both combatants have started using UGVs for logistics in areas where manned missions are too dangerous. The Russian UGV was damaged in the attack, but not disabled. Ukrainian drones designed to hunt down and destroy Russian reconnaissance drones, such as the Orlan 10, Orlan 30 and Zala, are having a significant impact on Russian intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance capabilities, also known as ISR. The program uses more cost-effective FPV one-way drones instead of air defense missiles. Taras Chmut, the director of Come Back Alive, told the UK publication The Times the interceptor drones cost $600 each versus $250,000 for a single air defense missile. Both combatants are changing tactics, with Russian operators flying at higher altitudes, higher speeds and more night missions. Ukrainian operators have responded by developing drones that can exceed the altitude and speed of the Russian drones and adding thermal imagers to locate them at night. The Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, arrested the head of the Khmelnytsky Regional Center for Medical and Social Expertise, Tetiana Krupa, and her son after a raid found over $6 million in cash and jewelry as part of a bribery and forged document scheme to avoid military service. Krupa would register men for disabilities and non-existent medical conditions. Reportedly, the pair own over 30 properties in Ukraine, 9 cars, a hotel and restaurant complex, and real estate in 2 European countries and in Turkey. The Prime Minister of Slovakia, Robert Fico, said that while he supports Ukraine's accession into the European Union, he will never permit membership into NATO as long as he remains the nation's leader. The geopolitics between the countries is complex, with Kyiv and Bratislava signing 4 agreements today and commitments from Fico to continue to provide non-lethal weapons, medical and demining aid. It was also announced that Slovaks crowdsourced another $4.4 million, providing Ukraine with 122 tons of large-caliber ammunition. Another $600,000 will be used to purchase ammunition for grenade launchers, which will be delivered by the end of 2024. Additionally, Fico announced that he had reached an agreement with Ukraine to continue the transit of Russian natural gas beyond 2024, which Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal denied. Shmyhal clarified that despite the declaration from Fico that a deal had been reached to allow Russian natural gas to flow after December 31st, no such deal was made or will be made with Moscow. During his evening address, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that during the upcoming meeting at Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany, quote, "The Donetsk fronts remain particularly challenging, and we will try to convince our partners at the upcoming Ramstein meeting of the urgent need for significant reinforcement of our capabilities and positions right now during these autumn months." Reinforcements in this context are not a request for NATO troops, but a request for more weapons and accelerating ongoing shipments. The United Kingdom provided Ukraine with $4.6 billion in funding to purchase UK-made weapons and ammunition. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense has already signed contracts with defense contractors Thales and Sheffield for anti-aircraft missiles, artillery systems, and replacement barrels for large-caliber weapons. French Defense Minister Sébastien Lecornu, speaking with the newspaper Sud-Ouest, said that the first batch of Mirage 2000 fighter planes with ground attack capabilities will be delivered to Ukraine in the first quarter of 2025. The exact timetable is dependent on how quickly Ukrainian pilots, mechanics and ground crews can complete their training. Our War Crimes and Human Rights section can cover difficult topics, including torture, gender-based violence, war crimes, and violence against children. Today's report contains only mild content. Over the weekend in New York, drone operators with the Azov Brigade recorded 3 Ukrainian soldiers surrendering, lying on the ground unarmed as ordered by Russian troops, and then executed. One of the Russian soldiers involved in the execution was captured and told Ukrainian officials they received a standing order in August to take no prisoners. Russia continues its war crimes in Kherson. Multiple airstrikes intentionally targeting schools and apartment buildings wounded 20, including 2 children. Russian drone operators have also started scattering PFM-1 anti-personnel mines in the populated areas of Kherson, in violation of the Geneva Conventions. A Russian drone operator on safari to hunt Ukrainian civilians followed a car back to its home in Antonivka and hit the family dog with a drone-dropped mortar round as it excitedly ran to greet its owner. Over the weekend in the Sumy Oblast, a Russian drone attacked a marked civilian bus in the village of Richki, 24 kilometers from Tetkina in the Kursk Oblast of Russia. 3 passengers were injured, aged 54 to 65. A Moscow court sentenced United States citizen Stephen Hubbard, 72, to almost 7 years in prison for participation of a mercenary in an armed conflict or military. Hubbard was detained in Izum in April 2022, with criminal charges filed in September. The Moscow court said he, quote, systematically received material compensation from Ukraine. Hubbard appears to have been maltreated while in pretrial detention for over 2 years, requiring assistance to walk and struggling to stand in the glass defendant's booth. United States citizen Robert Gilman, who was sentenced to almost 5 years in prison for kicking a police officer in Voronezh while drunk in 2022, had more than 7 years added to his sentence after being convicted of attacking a prison guard. Tetiana Plachkova, who was detained in September 2023 by Russian occupiers in Melitopol, died in Russian captivity. Her husband remains in detention. The couple refused to evacuate as Russian troops advanced in 2022, so they could care for her mother. The Federal Security Service of Russia accused Plachkova of espionage, and she was hospitalized in February 2024 in a coma. Russian occupiers said she had caught the flu. It is unclear when she died, with Russian officials releasing 3 different dates. Her mother was responsible for her burial. Satellite images show that the main building of autocrat Vladimir Putin's Sochi residence since 1991 had been demolished. The last known visit to the estate was on March 6, 2024, when IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi met with Putin. Well, that's interesting. The Russian autocrat reportedly has not returned to Sochi since. The legitimate self-declared president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, took offense upon arriving in Moscow for a state visit when Dmitry Medvedev greeted him as, quote, Your Excellency. What? Excellency? Where did you see this? Lukashenko snapped back. Video of the faux pas showed this wasn't a playful exchange, with the typically jovial Lukashenko appearing visibly irritated. If you've noticed, there's been no mention of the Chinese-made Desert Cross 1003 all-terrain vehicles recently, you would be correct. An analysis by Twitter, also known as X user Ben Tanmay, noted that after the use of ATVs peaked in June, they steadily declined, dropping by almost 70% by September. The Belgorod Oblast of Russia is now offering a 3 million ruble signing bonus, equal to $31,180, to sign a one-year contract with the Russian Federation Armed Forces. This is in addition to a salary of 230,000 to 250,000 rubles a month. Over 70 Yemeni contract soldiers are reporting a familiar story. They claim that handlers offered them jobs in Russia in hospitality, services and local security, only to be sent to Ukraine as stormtroops. The Oman-based recruiting company denied the claim, saying the Yemeni nationals knew they were going as soldiers. Yemeni officials dismissed their appeals for assistance, with Brigadier General Fuad al-Muhtadi saying, quote, "After signing the contract to volunteer, the volunteer becomes subject to military law and its mechanisms." India, Cuba, Mongolia, Pakistan and Sri Lanka have made similar allegations to handlers tricking their citizens to come to Russia for civilian jobs, who are then forced to join the military. Russian volunteers are reporting an acute shortage of antibiotics, including ceftriaxone, a very common antibiotic given in a clinical setting for a variety of bacterial infections and pre-surgery. Miroslava Reginskaya was in the so-called Donetsk People's Republic and shared a video showing the hospital overwhelmed with wounded Russian troops. Quote, "As you can see, the hospital is overcrowded. Beds are everywhere, and it is clear that the flow of patients, wounded soldiers, does not dry up." The Wall Street Journal reported that notorious arms dealer Victor Bout, who Nicolas Cage sensationally portrayed in the 2005 movie Lord of War, was back in business, working on a $10 million small arm deal with Yemeni rebels. Bout, who was midway through a 25-year prison sentence in the United States, was released in 2022 as part of a prisoner exchange with Moscow, which included professional basketball player Brittney Griner. The arms deal was reportedly limited to AK-74 assault weapons, with the support of Moscow. If you're not familiar with Soviet military arms, the AK-74 was released in 1974 as the replacement for the AK-47. Russian propagandist Yegor Guzenko, better known as the former private military company Wagner Group mercenary 13th, was arrested on October 5th. Guzenko, who has swung from professing unquestioning loyalty to the Kremlin to tirades against the Kremlin, including autocrat Putin, was on our top 3 list of male bloggers most likely to be arrested. He is expected to be charged with discrediting the Russian Federation Armed Forces under the so-called Don't Say War laws of September 2022 and would face up to 10 years in prison. He would be ineligible for service in a penal unit if convicted of those charges. I have economic news from Russia, where everything is going to plan. The Federal Anti-Monopoly Service of Russia has submitted draft legislation to the State Duma, requesting the authority to extend price controls, called stabilization agreements, to all goods in Russia. Russian store owners are already complaining that goods, including eggs, milk and AI-95 petrol, are being sold at a loss due to government-mandated price controls. The request to extend the power to all goods is almost certainly an attempt to curb inflation. Official figures are now considered a state secret, with the official inflation rate over 9% in August. Outside economists estimate real inflation is between 12 and 24%. In another sign that inflation is growing, the central bank has reduced the value of the ruble again, setting the official exchange rate against the US dollar to 96. Russia started setting its own benchmark against world currencies in the summer of 2024, after dollar and euro trading was halted on the Moscow exchange due to sanctions. And that's what we know. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.